So we've given up on the earpieces here. So I'm Margaret Levy. God, I don't even know how to describe myself. I'm a retiree from Stanford, Emerita Political Science. But as I keep telling people, I'm working almost as hard, but for less money. To my left here is Allison Schrager, who is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Next to her is Danny Roderick, who's the Ford Foundation Professor of International Political Economy at the Kennedy School. Matt Stoller, who is the Director of Research, American Economic Liberties Project. And Manuel Pastor, Director of the USC Equity Research Institute, University of Southern California, in case you don't know what the acronyms stand for. So we're going to try to have a conversation. I've asked people to indicate when they really want to intervene, and we're going to try to keep it moving. But we're going to start off with a couple of questions in which they will each speak for 2 minutes. And this really follows on with what Jeremy was asking us to do at the end of his talk, which is to start thinking seriously about what kind of political economy, what the actual specifics of a new political economy might look like. So I'm going to start off, because a number of us, as you know, and as Danielle told us at the beginning, and as Larry Kramer and Jen Harrison both emphasized, many of us have been part of projects for some years in trying to think about what a new political economy is. But it's time to really get concrete. And that's what I'm hoping we will start to do here. And all these people have a lot of experience in thinking about those questions. So given the economic challenges that we're confronting, I want to know what the principles are that are really driving you, what you think are the most important principles we should follow. And in light of that, given your 2 minutes, which dimensions of the economy most deserve our attention? What are your priorities? Allison, why don't we start with you since you're right here?
Okay.
We'll just go down, and then we'll engage.
And I might be the only neoliberal here for the end of neoliberalism. So in that spirit,
Welcome.
Thank you. When I think about, where neoliberalism might have fallen short and might become even a bigger problem going forward, it is this sort of disparate opportunity in that we see, most Americans maybe stagnating or doing a little bit better, while we see some Americans, not many of them, doing much, much better. And I think our response to that, and, all along, and probably have been for the last 40 years or so, has been like, okay, we need to protect those people more. And I'm starting to believe that that's actually where we went wrong, because what we've done for most Americans is really remove meaningful upside risk in their life. If you look at wage stagnation over time using Social Security records, what we see is wage variability falling over time, which in some ways is nice, because that means wages are more stable, and that means more predictability, but it also means less upside, while we see wage variability staying high for higher earners. So a lot of that is tied towards things like, less job changing, less moving. So I guess when I think of how we can make the economy, I guess I hate this expression because it's been abused, but I really think it's what we should think about, inclusive growth, which in the past I think has meant like just less growth, but actually mean that, which is thinking about making the economy more dynamic and offering more opportunity for everyone at all ends of the income spectrum.
Danny, you could follow on that very nicely.
Yeah, so as I've been thinking about what the priorities should be going forward, and not simply try to recreate an old past that we cannot go back to because of all these changes, I think I've come to a conclusion about what our priorities ought to be, and I've come so very reluctantly because it departs so much from the kind of work I've done in the past, because I worked on trade and globalization and industrialization and manufacturing, and yet where I come out with in terms of where we need to prioritize is good job and services. And I think I don't need to say much on good jobs because that has been brought up already, the importance of that, the importance of jobs for sense of identity, sense of recognition, social recognition, sense of who we are. And I think economists and technocrats have traditionally underemphasized. That's been a blind spot by sort of having sort of a bias that goes all the way back to Adam Smith and his battle with mercantilists, that we focus on the sort of the economies for consumption. Yet I think the important point has already been made that when people lose their jobs or sense of purpose, it goes much more beyond just the monetary loss. Now, actually, we do have economists working on this, and we're finding out that if you try to quantify what losing a job is, it's typically 5 or 6 times the monetary equivalent of the wages lost. So that's big, and thinking about in terms of what we do about good jobs is important. And I should add an important footnote on this. Good jobs goes beyond wages and earnings, because we know that in the last 10 years, for example, that the bottom of the labor market has been lifted, wages at the very bottom have increased. But precisely because of the form of many of the technologies that were introduced to get that productivity increase at the very bottom, it has meant intensification of work, a much greater Taylorist models of production, sort of extraction of sort of maximum effort from workers. And you actually look at the surveys, the sense of satisfaction, job quality satisfaction has not increased in many surveys that you can put them, sort of over time seems to have decreased. So we need to sort of, start to measure that and focus it. The other
Danny,
part,
I'm going to stop you now.
but I need to say just one thing about services, because I think that's really the key point, because that hasn't come up at all. That is clear that the jobs of the future are in services, and I think from that perspective, where I think the left and the right have met in terms of focusing on industrial policy and manufacturing, semiconductors, the trade balance, and so that's really, to me, seems to be largely not very relevant to the good jobs part of the picture. And the real question is, how do we create good jobs in services?
Thank you. Matt.
So thank you so much. So 2 minutes to prioritize everything in the economy.
Right.
Is that okay? So if I were to pick...
If you know what it is, you can do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if I were to pick one thing, it would be to deal with the main policy thrust of neoliberalism that's still in effect, which is that to make sure that returns of capital are go back to some sort of fair model. So right now, returns on capital are too high. If you think about the main strategy for most political leaders going back to the 80s, is to keep the stock market up. And it's not, there's all sorts of bad spillover effects of that, but I don't want to get into sort of, well, workers don't get enough or anything like that. I want to take it out of sort of the moral realm, and I want to bring us back to COVID, because I think this really illustrates the problem that we have with the number go up strategy. And that is, I was paying attention to China when this disease started to hit over there, and people over here were sort of paying attention in January, February of 2020. But the moment that people realized and said, you know what, COVID is a real thing, something we have to deal with as a society, it wasn't when public health experts said this is something we have to do. It wasn't when any sort of doctor said that we're seeing these cases. It wasn't when there was new innovations in China, things people were seeing. It was when the stock market went down. And that is a really messed up way to understand risk. And fundamentally, in America right now, and I could say globally, but I'll just stick to America since I have 2 minutes. If it doesn't affect the market capitalization of the stock market, it's not a problem. And that is a problem. And we need to figure out how to get out of that model. And getting out of that model is extremely dangerous, because there's hundreds of trillions of dollars invested in the way we do things. And I think we need to really put some more thought into what a different model of doing national development would actually be.
Manuel.
So first, I'm really glad to have learned so much about Luddites this morning. This was very useful. So as a Luddite, I really can't read the time there, so I can just keep going. No. I always like to let people know before I start
But I have a guillotine.
I know. That's old-fashioned, Margaret. I always like to let people know before I start speaking, Margaret knows this, that if my voice sounds pretty harsh, you might think it's because I've been screaming at pundits on television. That's part of it. But it's also that I've got a voice condition called spasmodic dysphonia. Spasms around the voice box. It's become famous because it's the condition Robert Kennedy Jr. has. So if I was not treated, I would sound like Robert Kennedy Jr. I would not be as delusional as Robert Kennedy Jr., but would sound like him. And it does get treated once a month. This is true with Botox, which is how we treat everything in Los Angeles. So
Can you have my?
I want to,
He gets extra.
no guillotine here. So I want to start, because I have an idea of where these will go, is that I think that the problem we might really be trying to solve for is disconnection. I think one of the critiques that came up around neoliberalism, and it's even being echoed by Allison, is this fundamental disconnection from one another, that the income inequality grew so wide that there's a sense of disconnected fates, and that instead of there but for the grace of God go I, there's a sense of, wow, I'm really glad I'm not that person on the street. The other really fundamental disconnection, I'm surprised hasn't come up more today, has to do with the changing racial composition of the country. It's going to become majority people of color by 2045 or so. It fills some of us with a sense of delight. I'm from Los Angeles. We got there in 1988. All I can think is the rest of the country will soon know the joy of a Korean taco truck. And what could be wrong with that? But it's clear that there's a lot of anxiety about that. And part of what I think you hear on the right, aside from racial fear, is a sense that if we're going to move in a direction of protecting people, we're going to draw a boundary around who it is that gets to be defined as American. So I think our economic problems and our political problems are connected to this disconnection.
Great. I'm hearing some common themes. I mean, I have a feeling that actually all of you agree with something that each of the others has said. There's a real problem with disconnection and belonging and community. There's clearly issues about the kind of reliance that we have on the kind of capital that currently exists and what that both tells us when we're having a breakdown and how we're going to correct it. The whole issue of good jobs, of upside risk, in dignity, all of those things are coming through. And there's also a question of the international dimension is implied in all of this, in what each of you had said. You can't separate capital in the U.S. from capital elsewhere. Part of the disconnection has to do with the way in which we're now connected to the whole world, with the kind of immigration practices that we have. That's also clearly related to good jobs and the way we think about upside risk and inclusive growth. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that international dimension. However you want to do it. It might be through immigration, it might be through capital processes, but go for it. Allison, I know you've thought a lot about this.
Yeah, I mean, someone asked me the other day something I've changed my mind on. And there's been a couple things, but one of them, the first thing that came to mind is low-skill immigration. Because I've always been, like most neoliberal economists, like, yeah, open borders, great. And I think I'm rethinking that not only because I think there is some evidence it does depress low-skill native wages, and also I think politically it's just untenable. I am still a big fan of immigration. I just now feel much more strongly that we need to have thoughtful policy, not that that's going to happen anytime soon, and we need to have a policy and we need to enforce that policy, whatever that is.
What does that policy look like? Any of you? I mean, I think we all agree that there needs to be a more thoughtful policy about immigration. So what is its content? And of course, the services require on the kind of immigration that we have right now. Matt?
I mean, I think there's a real, so you can think about immigration. We have to decide that we value the nation state. fundamentally, the argument about immigration, the same one about trades, the same one. There's a whole bunch of aspects of how we organize our society where, I love immigrants. I love trade. This is great. We need to improve people's lives all over the world. Fundamentally, that is a statement that you don't believe in the nation state, right? The nation state is a project. It is a project that took 1,000 years of blood and war to create. And most Americans believe in the nation state, and we divide ourselves on what we think, how you become American. But the question of whether there's an American and whether there isn't, and whether the American government should prioritize the interests of Americans, that is very clear. That's very clear where most Americans are. And I think that the struggle among elites is they're not necessarily sold on the idea that the American government should prioritize, should be biased in favor of Americans instead of non-Americans. So we can talk about the right way to do immigration, and you want more people or fewer people. But fundamentally, you have to start from the question, should we prioritize the interests of Americans, of people who are here, over people who are there, over there? And I think I would say that if you don't start with that premise, you're fringe. And I think a lot of elites are fringe.
Danny, as a person who studies these trade-offs,
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, but I think there's a way of going about it that could make it serve both the natives and potentially a large number of foreign workers as well. But let me tell you how not to do it first, which is that when, for example, one of the big areas where this issue comes up is in the context of care. That you talk to people, sort of worry about care workers, and the term that you always hear is shortage of care workers. Now, this is precisely, I think, kind of neoliberal framing of this problem that I think is at the heart of the political problem. Because when you say, what does it mean that there's a shortage of care workers, means that basically today we're offering terrible, terrible, terrible jobs to a very large number of disproportionately women participants in, and then that because we cannot get enough of them to do this job, then let's bring in foreigners from the rest of the world. Now that. And who will sort of continue to pay poorly. This is precisely the wrong way of framing it. I do think there is a role for having more construction workers, more care workers, other low-skilled workers from poor countries to come in. But it has to be in the context where you're upgrading and upskilling and increasing wages and work standards, using new technologies that are going to be directed to that purpose. So in a way that, for example, when foreign workers come in, they can help, women who want to participate in the labor market and get higher earning jobs, but instead have to stay home and take care of loved ones. And so I think, the way that we're framing this whole issue and a lot of the discussions already points to sort of a non-starter from a political standpoint. But that doesn't mean that there aren't mutually beneficial arrangements that would at the same time allow an increase in the number of foreign workers to come in.
So I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I wanted to make sure, because Allison, you got us started, and I think you gave 30 seconds on the idea, and then we started talking. Do you want to finish what you might want to say about that, and then I'll jump in?
Well, I mean, like what sort of immigration policy I would like to see? Well, I mean, I think it's a no-brainer for certainly high-skill migrants, in terms of reforming the H-1B program to where people who, have, advanced degrees, particularly in STEM here. I think, that obviously, has all sorts of positive benefits for everyone. I think I'm not against low-skill migration. I think, as you point out, they fulfill a lot of jobs that we have shortages in. But I think, again, we have to be thoughtful about, who we take and what skill, what sort of jobs they're going to fulfill, and sort of target the areas where we do have shortages. And again, can sort of lift the wages of everyone, including them.
So I'll jump in, and I think you were presenting it in too dichotomous of a way, Americans versus non-Americans. I was struck when Trump announced Liberation Day high tariffs that we wound up getting into discussion about what is the right tariff rate, should it be high, should it be low, industrial policy, how does it fit in, when in fact it was more ideologically a declaration against global interdependence, that we don't depend on the rest of the world, that someone's surplus is necessarily our deficit. It's a lose kind of situation, where the reflection of that is rejecting domestic interdependence and the way in which we rely on immigrants in multiple parts of our labor force. And correction, the research seems to show that the group most hurt by low-scale immigrants is incumbent immigrants, that is, people who've been in the country longer. Now, that said, there is something about
That most of us?
no, about people who are immigrants who have been in the country for 20 years,
Who are-
30 years.
Yeah.
They are in the most competitive position. Most American-born workers are in U.S.-born workers are in a complementary relationship with the labor that gets provided. Behind every software engineer is an army of nannies and gardeners and food service workers. That said, I wrote an article that came out in Dissent not so long ago. It had a great title. It was called ¿Por qué MAGA?, which is why did Latinos move in the MAGA direction? And part of it had to do with economics. Part of it actually had to do with immigration, because during those years of 2022, 2023, the combination of the image of disorder at the border and super big inflows in those years of unskilled workers unsettled even undocumented residents in the United States. If you'd had your ear to the ground in 2024, you would have heard undocumented people who'd been here for 20 or 30 years saying, who are these new people? Why are they getting services? What is this system that's erupted right now? And they're the ones that help to convince their long-standing U.S. citizen or immigrant, Latino cousins, family members, et cetera, to move in a rightward direction. But they're moving in the other direction right now because this current reign of terror and disruption is not the kind of enforcement anybody had in mind. So I think that it's not as dichotomous. I think when there's a massive inflow, people are trying to figure out how it can be regulated. But clearly, if we were able to absorb 11 to 12 million undocumented folks before that inflow successfully into this economy, I think there's room for that kind of labor.
Matt, I'm sure you want to come back on that, but I do want to announce to everybody that the last 15 or so minutes will be devoted to questions, so please send in your questions to Slido.
Yeah, I actually don't disagree with what you're saying. Also, when you say I don't disagree, it means you do disagree, which I like. It's just kind of a little more confusing. No, I wasn't trying to say America. Well, I was trying to when I said there's a we can agree or disagree about what makes an American. There's a really wide spectrum there. If most Americans think if you lived here for 20 years, you're part of the community, you're an American, right? You may not have the papers or whatever, but nobody thinks that way. And Donald Trump is saying, well, if you're a Saudi prince that can pay $1 million, you're an American. Like, these are strange. We're having debates over the nature of what is an American. And I think, in general, if you think about the Declaration of Independence or Gettysburg Address or sort of foundational U.S. documents, what Americans believe the purpose of America is to prevent arbitrary coercion, right? So that we can be independent. And arbitrary coercion can happen in many ways. It can happen through corporate monopolies. It can happen through crime. It can happen through attacks on public safety. It can happen through a lot of weird new people coming into your community that you didn't invite there and you have no say over it. Or it can happen through armed government agents coming in and taking people from your community who have been there for 20 years. And so all I was saying is that one of the reasons that it's hard to have this conversation is because in order to have the conversation about what is an American, you have to actually believe that there is an America and that the American project is worthwhile and is a contract among all of us where we protect ourselves from that arbitrary coercion. So I love taco trucks. I think we should have a lot more immigrants. That's my view. But I also think that if you're going to, the reason I think immigrants, the way I would frame it is these are people who want to be Americans. That's great, right? And that's not what you hear. You hear the rhetoric of, oh, they're so victimized, and oh, they need to do the things we need to do, and I think it's like, no, they want to be Americans. Like, that's what's more American than that, and that is a fundamentally different argument, because even though it's the same underlying policy, because what you're saying is the American project is worth something. It's collective. So that's what I'm getting at.
So one of the things you just raised was the social contract and whether there is a social contract. And I'm wondering if we all agree on what the elements of that social contract are. So maybe we could spend a minute or two just sort of revealing what we think are the crucial pieces of a social contract that Americans have with their government and their economy. You mentioned fairness earlier. I think that's something we probably all agree it has to have. But what fairness means is going to be very different, I expect, for Manuel than it might be for you, Matt. Manuel, maybe you could start on this one about what you see as the crucial elements of a social contract here. So that's going to be the basis for building our policies.
That's a very easy question, so thanks, Margaret.
You're welcome.
We did a thing some years ago, which resulted in a book called Solidarity Economics, Why Mutuality and Movements Matter. And it actually ties in to the earlier conversation when Jen Harris was pointing out that at these major turning points with new social contracts, FDR and the New Deal, Keynesianism as an intellectual framework, Reagan, the sort of more embrace of the market with supply-side economics, monetarism as an intellectual framework, that at this moment we are without a really clear intellectual framework, but there's a bubbling up from the grassroots about expectations about what our economy and our government can deliver to us. So a couple of years ago, we did this project, Solidarity Economics, which actually, rather than starting by talking to a bunch of academics, we talked to activists about what they thought would be good progressive policy. And interestingly, what they said was, we don't want a laundry list, we want a set of principles. And the principles were pretty basic about valuing work, that work is about more than being paid. It's about dignity and purpose, about valuing community and making sure that people can be taken care of, that there is a social safety net, creating a sense of connection and purpose. And I think those are the basic things that need to be there. Mechanically, I think that means healthcare. I think that means supporting the care industry, both for people who utilize it and people who work in it. I think it means workforce development stuff along the lines of what Danny is talking about. I think it actually means legalizing the massive undocumented population that's here. Maybe some rules. You have to be here for a couple of years. You have to have some family ties to make sure that it works, so that we've actually make sure that immigration works for us rather than undercutting people who are already here. I think the elements of it can be spelled out, but we need these principles as well.
One of the things I hear missing from that is relationships with government, in the sense that government is, and this comes from some of my own thinking about this, that government is trustworthy, that it actually can deliver on some of those promises if there is a social contract, and that government does that in a relatively fair way and in a way that is accountable. So another discussion that was occurring earlier. So I'd like to be sure that we bring government into the story of the social contract. Somebody, Danny, go ahead. And then I see Allison ready to pop in.
I mean, I would push that question one step back and ask, so what does it, what enables a social contract in the first place? And I think that is having a healthy middle class that's the foundation of a cohesive society and a healthy democracy. And it's really, an insight that goes back to the ancient Greeks, or Aristotle, that without a large middle class, you get polarization, and social and cultural and ideological polarization, and you cannot have a healthy relationship with your government as well. And that is sort of the weakness, or the economic anxieties associated with a weak middle class are also the source of authoritarian populism and the rise of authoritarianism. So I think that to me is really the foundational issue. And how do we get that? How do we reconstruct the middle class? It seems to me to be the essential precondition to before we can even start talking about the shape of the social contract.
So I was just reading, one of our junior fellows just wrote a column for City Journal about the American dream. So I would say, the social contract is feeling like we have entitled to that, get to go with that dream. But what was interesting about our column is they asked people what they thought the American dream was. And there was a big divide, almost 50-50, with half saying it's opportunity and half saying it's security. And, I'm a financial economist, so I tend to think those things are at odds with each other. I mean, you find the right balance. That's what we do in financial markets. The more risk you take, the more potential you have for upside, but the bigger chance you have for loss. So the sort of dance you do in financial markets is figuring out where do you want to be in that. And I think that is, I think our challenge is figuring out how much security do we get versus how much does that rob people for upside, and where is that? And it's probably different for different people in different parts of the income spectrum. But a question for you about your question. So there's some evidence that the middle class is smaller than it used to be relative to the population, but some of that is from some people joining the upper middle class. So, what is more important, having those people in the middle or having their ability to move up the income spectrum?
I think both, and I think you're right to bring that up. And I think so one important point to bring in is the comparative dimension of what's happening, for example, in Europe. That in the United States, also in the UK, it's very clear that the middle class has been shrinking, and it's not clear that mobility has been increasing at all. But it is also the case that in a lot of Western European countries where safety nets have been much stronger, that the measured middle class hasn't really shrunk, or in many cases measured wage inequality or other measures of inequality haven't risen. But what the survey evidence points out, that there is still the same kinds of anxieties about what's happening in labor markets, that jobs are much less predictable, that there is more of a fear of sliding down in the income scale. There's a sense of job quality is going down. So I think we need to think about sort of middle class and what it means in a kind of a broader sense, and not just measured by an income metric.
So I want to read something. So this is from an anonymous
I
comment.
thought you were reading your mail. I was a little worried.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to look at my phone now. So this is an anonymous. Thank you for the pity laugh. I appreciate that. I didn't think it was that good a joke, so that's the right amount of laughter. So this is a commenter to the FTC on their petition to ban non-competes, which, by the way, was put forward under the legal authority of unfair methods of competition. You ever want to upset an economist, tell them that the word unfairness is in the law, and they'll get really upset. Okay, so my employer comes far too close to owning me than should be possible in a quote-unquote free country. Now, I don't know if that person made a lot of money or a little bit of money, but I can tell you there are very powerful people who are terrified of the Warner Brothers, Paramount, Netflix bidding war, who are afraid to speak up. And there are wealthy cattle ranchers that are terrified of Tyson's. And there are app developers who are terrified of Apple. You want to talk about what's going on in America? It is fear. The pervasiveness of fear, the idea that the government and corporate institutions are against you, have consolidated and have gatekeeping power, is terrifying. And it's terrifying everyone. And it's not just terrifying the poor or the middle class. It's terrifying everyone. And I think the fundamental problem is that we have to figure out what the point of our government is. And we have two choices. And one of them is to prioritize the efficiency of capital. That is the model we have run for 40 years. And the other is to prioritize independence through freedom from arbitrary coercion, whether that coercive force is a criminal gang, whether it's a monopolist, whether it's an employer with an arbitration agreement, whether it's a rival. These are things we've dealt with for hundreds of years. We had revolutions about this. It isn't that complicated. Why are people mad? It's because they're being arbitrarily coerced. Just call a customer service line. You don't have to, this isn't like, we all experienced it. We were all seeing different prices for different people. Like, we see this happening to our society. We don't need to imagine that it's other people. And we haven't made a decision about what our government is for.
So that's a really good point. And what I want to come back to your question is, I think, as Dan was pointing out, what's behind the social contract. And I think it's one, a sense of mutuality, which is created through organizing civic life, connection, belonging. And then it has to do with the balance of power and whether or not workers and others have sufficient power to set the terms of the debate about what that social compact looks like. And in the last 40 years, capital has helped to set the terms workers have had and communities have had much less voice. One other aspect which has not come up so much in this conversation, which I think is important, has also to do with what Allison said, because I'm assuming that a lot of people answering that question were a bit younger, which is that this generational divide as well. I've got 2 kids, they're a little bit older, 39. He's a musician. Talk about an insecure life. He actually is now making a ton of money. Thank you very much. My daughter is a social worker, so we've basically had sort of project kids as we've helped to develop them. But those young people, even if they're doing well, feel like they cannot buy a house, they cannot get ahead. The system is deeply unfair. And even my son, who at this point is really an entrepreneur, because what he does with his music is sell it to commercials and other documentaries, etc. Even though he's an entrepreneur, he's excited about Mamdani being elected in New York City because he values the whole notion of change, of what he sees as opportunity, and sees it wrapped up in some degree of security. So I think it's really important. There's a whole generation that feels like they have just been totally left behind in the last 30 to 40 years.
So how do we, here's another easy question for you all. How do we change that power imbalance? I mean, I know what your answer is, Manuel, which is mobilization and creating new solidarity. Matt, I'm a little less sure about your answer, though I know it has to do with controlling capital to some extent and changing the laws, but that only pushes us back to how do we go about changing the laws unless we change the power imbalance. I'm not sure, we haven't really addressed it with the two of you as much. It hasn't come up. So,
Who has too much power?
well, that's the question. I mean, even if there's not inclusive politics right now and an economy,
Mark Zuckerberg has too much power.
would you disagree with that?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't really have no, I don't think so. I mean, he has a lot of power. I don't know what too much power means.
Go ahead, Matt. He does.
So just in the last couple of weeks, there's one story that showed. So I was really intrigued. The last speaker talked about how young people don't believe in democracy. So last couple of weeks, there were 2 stories that I want to bring up. One is apparently Reuters found that 10% of Meta's income, $16 billion, comes from advertisements for fraudulent products or deceptive products. $16 billion is a lot of money. The second is that there was a lawsuit filed, and there's many of these, and this one was pretty credible, that Meta was knowingly abetting or overlooking obvious cases of child sex trafficking in scalable ways. This has also come out in antitrust cases. This is just the last couple of weeks. Now, I feel like when you bring this up, and I write about this stuff, people are just like, yeah, I know, but no one's going to do anything, like whatever, right? To me, that's too much power. To me, that's the crisis of democracy right there. And it is because of this ignoring how market power works, ignoring that the role of government isn't to prioritize the efficiency of capital, but to make sure that the brains of our children, and frankly me, are developing in a reasonable way. I mean, I'm addicted to my phone. I don't know about you guys, but I am. And it's like, why can't we make different decisions? We can't make different decisions because people are wondering, well, maybe Mark Zuckerberg doesn't have too much power. Who is to say? How can we measure it? And it's like, can't we just use our common sense here? And I feel like America is getting to the point where we're starting to use our common sense. We haven't voted for populist candidates in my lifetime, and we're about to do that. And I think that's a very exciting thing because it means that we may try to revamp how we make decisions as a society. But it's also really, really dangerous because we finance everything by giving power to people like Mark Zuckerberg so they keep the stock market up. That's what's in our pensions. That's what funds this nice building. That's what funds our universities. That's what funds virtually every institution in America.
What you're also describing is a feeling of powerlessness.
Yeah.
As being at least as important as who has the actual power. And would you agree, Allison, since you were raising the question about who has that power, that there is a sense of powerlessness among much of the population?
I would say so, but yeah, I mean, absolutely. As I was saying, that's part of, I think, the issue they're having is I don't feel like they feel they can fully participate in the economy. But I don't think that's necessarily because Mark Zuckerberg is getting richer. I think it's because we've set up a lot of hurdles from them really fully participating in the economy that's made the economy a lot less dynamic and less able for them to benefit from it too. I mean, we talked about the stock market. I'm not sure if, I don't know if your point is, Matt, that stocks are too expensive, so they're mispriced. Is that what you're saying? Like, where we put too much?
Just briefly, we have a form of statecraft, and the primary goal is to keep equity prices and asset prices up. That's the point of our government right now.
Is it? How so? I mean, are you saying the pressure?
I mean, you want me to go through the bailouts?
No. I want Danny to get it.
I mean, like 60% of the population does own stock. I mean, it's not like just Mark Zuckerberg's the only equity holder.
I mean, I agree that there is way too much wealth inequality. I would like to see a wealth tax. I think I would like to make the whole fiscal system a lot more progressive. At the same time, I don't see what it would do to economic opportunity for the people that we care of in terms of creating better connection, a healthier middle class, more job opportunities if we were to take away 30%, 40%, 50% of top wealth away. So I'm not sure that that's going to achieve that. Where I think we are at a dangerous moment right now is we have when very highly concentrated capital and huge amounts of wealth back up political power directly, and then we get a kind of a crony capitalism that is increasingly authoritarian. And unfortunately, I think that is the most worrying part about where we are now. I disagree with, I think that since 2016, we've been going through a period of economic policy experimentation. And we've gotten a lot of different things. Some of the things that happened under Biden, many of them I'm in favor of. Many of the things that are happening under President Trump, I dislike very much. But I think these are all reversible things. It's a period of policy experimentation where we're trying to get at what the new configuration of policies are going to be. What I think is going to be very difficult to reverse is this alliance between capital and political authority that's moving us in an authoritarian direction that's undermining democracy in the United States and the rule of law.
So if we took 30% of Mark Zuckerberg's wealth, he'd have less power? Is this what?
Is that
Either anyone.
I mean, I think probably, yes, he would have less power.
Yes.
I think Danny's point, though, is that even if you did that, it's not solving the problem of opportunity for a lot of people unless you figure out where you're putting that money in a way that actually generates employment. I mean, it'd be great if Danny could talk a little bit about what you're doing at a local level, because I think part of what needs to happen, the New Deal, and Margaret knows this better than most, was a period of local experimentation before it's surfaced to national policies. And I think there are a lot of local experiments where the power of mutuality, of understanding that businesses and communities and workers will benefit if they collaborate together, but also understanding that you need to change the power system so that worker and community voice gets there. We're doing a project like that in California called the Community Economic Mobilization Initiative, where we're trying to train community-based organizations to both have a good economic message and have enough economic literacy to participate in workforce development debates to make the change. So I think there is some hope in what we see Danny and some others, Gordon, doing, that's trying to lift up experiments at a local level that shift power and create an alternative.
So, sorry, I just want to just clarify. So we're arguing that Mark Zuckerberg has all this money. He's using it in a destructive way. So if we take 30% of it away from him, the government will use it in a more constructive way?
Can I just, if you take 30% of his wealth, you're showing him you can take 30% of his wealth. Point is, that guy's sitting there saying nothing's ever going to happen to me no matter what I do, because that's the problem. We all know what is going on, that this is Meta is a destructive institution, and we can't do anything about it. And it's not a question of just wealth. It's a question of power. I also want to, just the framing that he has all this wealth and we're taking it from him just gets the causality wrong. It's not his wealth. He's extracting it from us. It's our wealth that he's taking. All we have to do is stop him from taking it.
Let me reframe the question. There was actually a question here that's now disappeared. Interesting. Which was about what would happen if we transform capital hegemony. If we got rid of capital hegemony, what would be the trade-offs? What would be the benefits? What would be the losses? And that's really the question. It's not Mark Zuckerberg.
Right. No,
It's really kind of the power, the disproportionate, in many people's view, power of capital and the disproportionate lack of power of those who don't have capital, even if they have some shares.
I mean, so again, the way that I would frame the question is not so much as wealth per se, but the extreme financialization of our economy, the way that the stock market drives everything, and so forth. And I think that's producing a number of undesirable effects that is actually preventing us to engage, for example, in the kind of policy experimentation that we need to do, to the extent that might harm the interests of that particular class. But let me give a very specific example, and just to tie it in with some of the previous discussion. So the care sector that we could come back to, because it's so important in so many different ways. Here is a sector that we need significant innovation, both in terms of organizational designs as well as new technologies. And so I've been looking around for different types of models. In the Netherlands, there is a kind of an organization, a social enterprise that is called Buurtzorg, which actually I think translates as neighborhood care groups, which is organized around a principle where the caregivers exercise much greater autonomy and agency, have much more sort of ground level decision-making power, and actually has grown to be something like 20 or 30% of the care sector in the Netherlands. That seems to provide much greater both job satisfaction as well as satisfaction for the people being cared for. Now, it's very difficult to imagine something like this sort of arising and becoming big in an economy where it's private equity that's sort of determining largely sort of what the outcomes are going to be. So this is, the kind of, outcomes that you have, in an economy where I think financial markets, private equity, and stock markets are really driving our understanding of how, so these broad policies ought to be conducted. So those things that I'm much more worried about than necessarily directly wealth inequality per se.
I don't have an answer. I don't know what to do, because if you do it too fast, Everyone's 401k gets cut in half. You have mass dislocation across the board. The U.S. imports $1 trillion more than we export. I know people think that that's just a fact of nature, but the other countries don't have to sell us that. And if we definancialize our economy, one of the things we'll do is we'll have a much bigger manufacturing sector, which would be good. But that means a lot of people who are don't do manufacturing are going to lose power. I mean, you're going to see dramatic reshuffling in the elites. Just older people, there's about $100 trillion held by the baby boom generation. They're not starting new careers. That's all in
Some of us are.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you said you're not making enough money. You're making less money. So you start new careers, but not making.
Money's not the only value.
Well, it will be after I'm done. No.
Is your work feeling really dignified right now? Yeah.
I got a lot of respect.
I don't know the answer, but the point is we're going to have to find different ways of making decisions, and for a really long time. And I saw this during the financial crisis. A lot of people were upset about the bankers doing, making decisions, and they were like, oh, don't do it that way, don't do it this way. And Tim Geithner said something. He was like, look, essentially, we're making decisions, and if you want to make decisions, you want to run Citigroup, you should have the courage to do that. And what I saw was that most of the liberals that I were dealing with were too afraid to say, I can run the banks. And they were like, yeah, the bankers have to run the banks. And I think that fear is pervasive. I think we are afraid to run our society. We are afraid, in World War I, Bernard Baruch, he was a financier, but the head of U.S. Steel came to him and he said, you're going to make steel for this price so that we can, go and do things in war. The CEO of U.S. Steel came to him and said, what are you going to do if I quit? And he said, I'll replace you with a second lieutenant. And it was really funny during World War I. That was a good story. But the point is that he had the confidence to say, we can run our economy, we can run these institutions. This is not rocket science. I think we lack a fundamental confidence in our ability to actually organize our institutions. And we look, and my apologies to the people on stage, we look to economists to validate us, to be our kind of emotional blankies. And they constantly say things that are wrong and that are obviously catastrophic. And I think we have to find a way to build the confidence to say this stuff is.
Economists.
Well, you are always right. We have to use common sense like we did for most of American history.
So like less of the market allocating capital and more government or allocating capital. This is your vision?
Well, we have government allocated capital. I mean, the Federal Reserve has a $9 trillion balance sheet. I know actually the Federal Reserve, it's a .orgs, which is kind of funny, but we have a form of statecraft, and I think this idea that
You want more of it.
Allison, so I'm hearing in several of your questions some real serious concern about giving government more role. And maybe you could I want you to know that we are answering the questions that are on here. We're just not saying them out loud. But
Yeah, it's the economist in me who tends to ask questions passive aggressively. So, yeah,
Just wondering.
I think the government. I said, like, I'm not like a libertarian who's like you shouldn't have government. I just rather than making the government bigger, we should maybe focus more on having the government be more effective at what it's doing. Like, I mean, this is in that way, I am supportive of the whole abundance movement of let's let the government be effective at what it does rather than just, I think our answer to sort of a lot of our social problems and sort of failings of the safety net, our sort of insecurity is just making the government bigger rather than just having the government be more effective at serving people who really do need support from it.
I think there'd probably be agreement on that we'd like government to be more effective at the things it should be doing. So one of the questions up here is what are the important points of agreement among the panelists?
Sorry, government is really effective if you need a bailout. Government is incredibly effective in all sorts of ways. I reject this idea that we have we don't have a form of governance now, and that anybody who says we should regulate things differently is saying we need a much bigger government. We have a massive government. Neoliberalism is premised on a form of statecraft and huge government interventions all of the time. And let's just acknowledge that we're talking about two different forms of governance.
Well, I think the issue we're all agreeing on is that we need better ways of making decisions. That it's not that we're all against government or we're all for government doing everything. I don't think any of us are saying that. But we all of us, I think, are saying, and you said it quite explicitly, Matt, that we need new ways of making decisions, that there's something fundamentally flawed in our institutional arrangements right now that are making people feel that they don't have power, that are making it hard to reach the kind of mutuality and solidarity that Manuel's talking about, or produce the kinds of good jobs and services that Danny is emphasizing. Would you agree or disagree that we need better decision-making apparatuses, both in government and for finances?
Well, that's easy to agree with. I was going to say that I
Looking for
thought
something
another
easy to agree with.
important point of agreement was that talking about Mark Zuckerberg can really derail a conversation. What I hear is, at least amongst some of us, a real need to think about the balance of power that helps to structure a social compact or the arrangements. I hear an acknowledgement that there's a lot of unease about where we're at right now, even from Allison, who might be more comfortable with a market approach. Has this actually gone a little too far? I hear a struggle of trying to figure out where's the right balance. Where's the right balance between private initiative, what I would call community initiative or civic initiative, and the government stepping in? What's the right balance around migration and putting the boundaries around what it means to be American? So I also hear that we actually need to make sure that this conversation actually goes beyond Harvard walls and this beautiful treehouse and somehow to the street level, because as Jen Harris was telling us, this dissatisfaction is out there, and we can learn something from it that can inform us. Again, we did this project, Solidarity Economics. It's got a great book. It's got a website called solidarityeconomics.org. You can download the book for free. And we actually also had a comic book version made in English and Spanish for community education.
Well, other than all reading Solidarity Economics.
Well, I mean, that's pretty much it, Margaret.
Yeah, right. I agree. I agree with that, of course. I don't disagree. I think what I'm hearing is a lot of shared concerns, but there's obviously getting the balance right. I'm going to give each of you a last 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I think we all agree that this economy is not giving everyone the opportunity and security they feel they need, and a lot of people are left out. I think just maybe where we differ is the right means to restore that balance.
Yeah, I mean, I hope as we go forward that we don't recreate the all-tired and totally unproductive debates about markets versus governments. You know, that dichotomy doesn't serve us well on any important question of public policy. It's always government and markets and the complementarity and using that well. So you know, let's not go back to that old tired debate.
Thank you. Agreed.
Yeah, I think we all agree that we need better decision-making capacity, but the nature of that decision-making is the basis of our disagreement. And so my view is that we've run our society based on the idea that liberty from restraint, liberty from government is liberty. And I think we need to return to a more traditional American form of liberty, which is that freedom means being free and independent from arbitrary coercion. And if we can move there, I think we can build a better society.
I yield my 30 seconds to the compañera from Seattle. Go.
Thank you all. I have nothing more to say. Thank you. Wonderful panel. Thank you.